poor girl drags a Korean Mafia boss away from his wedding. Seconds later, the truth explodes. 5 seconds. That was the razor-thin margin between Cheol-min's future and a concrete tomb. The cathedral doors didn't swing open with reverence. They exploded inward as a barefoot girl in a shredded green dress tore down the aisle like she was racing against hell itself. Ada, barely 21. Her skin streaked with alley grime and her lungs burning, created a percussion of panic with each footfall against the sacred marble. The assembled guests, a who's who of Seoul's most lethal power brokers, turned as one, their champagne glasses frozen mid-toast. Gasps rippled through the pews like a stone dropped in still water. At the altar stood Cheol-min, youngest boss of the Han River Syndicate, his hand hovering inches from his bride Seo-yoon's jeweled fingers. He looked up, his eyes locking onto the approaching chaos, not with rage, but with the stunned confusion of a man watching his own death arrive in rags. Ada didn't slow, didn't explain. She simply lunged forward with the desperate strength of someone who'd seen too much, grabbed fistfuls of his designer lapels, and wrenched him backward off the platform with a force that defied her malnourished frame. "Move!" The word tore from her throat like broken glass. Before the wall of security could draw their weapons, she dragged the bewildered kingpin toward the side corridor, throwing them both through the threshold into the narrow passageway beyond. Exactly 5 seconds later, the world split open. A thunderous roar swallowed the afternoon as the altar's foundation collapsed inward, concrete and flame erupting upward in a hellish fountain. The shockwave turned stained glass into deadly rain, and the marble floor buckled like the earth itself was swallowing the ceremony whole. Smoke and screams filled the sacred space where moments before, vows were about to be spoken. In the shadowed corridor, covered in plaster dust and ringing with silence, Cheol-min stared up at the trembling woman crouched over him, his mind unable to comprehend that this invisible stranger had just pulled him from a living grave. Hello friends, welcome to our story. Before we uncover how a woman the world refused to see became the only one who could save Seoul's most powerful man, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Have you ever helped someone when you had nothing to gain? Share your story in the comments below. We love hearing from you. Now, let's rewind the clock to see how fate brought these two souls together. The morning before. The morning had begun with a suffocating sense of dread, a heaviness that clung to the air around the grand cathedral of the Sacred Heart like fog refusing to lift. Inside the cathedral's private vestry, Cheol-min adjusted his silk tie, staring into an ornate mirror at a man he barely recognized. He was the head of the Han River Syndicate, a leader who commanded the loyalty of hundreds and controlled the flow of commerce through half the city's ports. Yet today, standing in this borrowed room in his tailored suit, he felt like a prisoner being dressed for his own execution. This was not a wedding born of love. It was a merger, a cold, calculated business transaction written in blood and brokered over whiskey in smoke-filled rooms. He was to marry Seo-yoon, the sharp-tongued, ice-cold daughter of Chairman Jae-sung, leader of the rival northern faction. Their union was supposed to end a turf war that had turned entire neighborhoods into battlegrounds and left the streets stained with the consequences of pride and power. But Cheol-min felt a twisting knot in his gut that no amount of expensive scotch could dissolve. He studied his reflection, the dark circles under his eyes that the stylist had tried to conceal, the tension in his jaw that he couldn't quite release. He was a man who had built his reputation on honor and loyalty, values that were becoming dangerously obsolete in a world ruled by treachery and greed. His right-hand man stood by the door, eyes constantly scanning, professional paranoia keeping him alert. Cheol-min sighed, turning away from the mirror. He didn't want this. He didn't want the fragile peace if it meant shackling himself to a family known for smiling while they slipped the knife between your ribs. Chairman Jae-sung was a viper in an expensive suit, a man who spoke of honor while plotting your downfall. And Seo-yoon? She was her father's daughter in every calculated gesture and cold glance. But the treaty was signed. The families were assembled. The cameras were ready to document this historic alliance. Cheol-min straightened his jacket, steeling himself for the performance of his life, completely unaware that the only person who actually cared whether he lived or died was currently digging through a dumpster 3 blocks away. Ada's world was a stark, brutal contrast to the velvet and gold of the cathedral. At 21, she carried the weight of a lifetime of hardship in the slope of her shoulders and the wariness in her eyes. Her dress, once of vibrant green, was now torn and stained with the grime of survival, hanging loosely on her too-thin frame. She hadn't eaten a proper meal in 3 days, her stomach a cramping knot of pain she'd learned to push to the back of her mind. The city was a cruel host to those without a roof, and Ada had learned the hard way how to be invisible, to keep her head down and her presence small. She moved through the alleyways like a ghost, unseen by the commuters rushing to their climate-controlled offices and the tourists photographing the city's gleaming skyline. But despite her circumstances, Ada possessed something the streets hadn't managed to break. A sharp mind and observant eyes that noticed what others missed in their hurry. She saw the small kindnesses, the bakery owner who sometimes left bags of day-old bread by the back entrance. And she saw the casual cruelties, the way people stepped around her like she was trash blown against a building. Today, her search for sustenance had brought her near the cathedral, drawn not by faith but by the scent of expensive catering wafting from the loading docks. She knew that the wealthy wasted more food in a single event than she'd see in a month, and where there was a high society wedding, there were always leftovers destined for the dumpster. That's when she saw them. Not caterers, not wedding staff, men in dark jackets and tactical gloves, moving with purpose, carrying long metal cases and speaking in urgent, hushed tones that made her instincts scream danger. Ada pressed herself against the wall, making herself even smaller, and watched. And what she saw would change everything. Cheol-min had not chosen love. He had chosen survival. At 28, he was the youngest leader the Han River Syndicate had ever seen, a fact that earned him equal parts respect and resentment from men twice his age. He'd inherited the position after his predecessor was found floating in the harbor, a reminder that power in this world came with an expiration date written in blood. He stood now in the cathedral's private vestry, surrounded by mahogany and gold leaf, adjusting cufflinks that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His reflection stared back at him from an antique mirror. Sharp jaw, expensive haircut, eyes that had seen too much too young. He looked like success. He felt like a prisoner. This wedding was supposed to be a triumph. Chairman Jae-sung had proposed the union 6 months ago over cigars and whiskey, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Our families have spilled enough blood," he'd said smoothly. "Let's build something stronger than violence." Translation: let's merge our operations before we destroy each other completely. Seo-yoon, Jae-sung's daughter, was beautiful in the way ice sculptures were beautiful. Cold, perfect, untouchable. She'd agreed to the marriage with the same enthusiasm one might show signing a business contract. Because that's exactly what this was. A merger sealed with rings instead of signatures. Cheol-min had spent his entire adult life cleaning up blood left by men older and stupider than him. This wedding was supposed to end a turf war that had swallowed entire neighborhoods, left children without fathers, turned commerce into carnage. But his instincts, the same ones that had kept him alive through 3 assassination attempts, screamed that something was wrong. Jae-sung's family didn't make peace. They made corpses. Still, the treaty was signed. The guests were assembled. The cameras were ready to immortalize this historic alliance. He straightened his jacket one final time, steeling himself for the performance ahead, completely unaware that 3 blocks away, a girl he'd never met was about to become the only thing standing between him and a concrete grave. Ada's morning had started the same way the last 90 mornings had started, with hunger. She'd woken on a cardboard mat behind a closed laundromat, her body stiff from sleeping on concrete, her stomach cramping with familiar emptiness. 3 days since her last real meal. The protein bar she'd found in a trash can yesterday had only made the hunger worse, reminding her body of what it was missing. This wasn't supposed to be her life. 6 months ago, she'd had a mother, a job at a textile factory, and a tiny apartment that leaked when it rained but was hers. Then her mother got sick, the kind of sick that eats through savings faster than cancer eats through bone. Ada had sold everything, borrowed from everyone. It hadn't been enough. Her mother died on a Tuesday. Ada lost her job on a Friday. Budget cuts, they said, not meeting her eyes. Eviction came the following Monday. The city had swallowed her whole. She'd learned quickly that being homeless meant being invisible. People looked through you like you were made of glass. Mothers pulled their children closer. Shop owners watched your hands. Police told you to move along, as if poverty was a crime of loitering. Ada had learned the rhythms of survival, which bakeries threw out bread at closing, which alleys the gangs avoided, which subway stations didn't check too carefully. She'd learned to make herself small, to take up less space, to apologize for existing. But she'd also learned to watch. When you're invisible, people don't guard their words. They don't notice you're listening. Ada had developed a sixth sense for danger, which men to avoid, which corners promised trouble, which conversations meant someone was about to get hurt. It was this skill that had kept her alive. And it was this skill that would save Cheolmin's life. Today, hunger had pulled her toward the cathedral district, where the smell of expensive catering drifted through the spring air like a cruel promise. Rich people wasted more food in a single event than she'd see in a month. Wedding receptions always had leftovers. Ada positioned herself near the service entrance, waiting for the caterers to start their trash run. That's when she noticed them. 3 men in dark jackets, moving with purpose that didn't match the celebratory atmosphere. They weren't carrying champagne or flowers. They carried metal cases, heavy ones, and spoke in clipped whispers while checking the perimeter. Ada's instincts prickled. She pressed herself against the wall, becoming part of the shadows, and watched. One man crouched near a drainage grate beneath where the altar would be visible through the open delivery doors. Another checked his watch with military precision. The third opened a case that definitely didn't contain wedding decorations. Ada's breath caught as she watched them slide something into the cathedral's foundation. Then she heard the words that would change everything. Quick dry cement. She didn't understand. Not yet. But every survival instinct she'd honed on these streets told her she was watching something terrible take shape. While Cheolmin stood in luxury, preparing to trade his freedom for peace, Ada crouched in an alley, watching men prepare his grave. The collision was coming. Neither of them knew they had less than an hour left. Ada should have left. Every instinct she'd developed on the streets screamed at her to turn around, find another alley, another dumpster, another day. People like her didn't get involved. Getting involved meant getting noticed. Getting noticed meant trouble. But she didn't move. The 3 men worked with the efficiency of people who'd done this before. They weren't nervous, weren't checking over their shoulders. They moved like the cathedral grounds belonged to them, like whatever they were doing had been planned down to the minute. Ada made herself smaller against the brick wall, her torn green dress blending with the shadows. She'd perfected the art of being nothing, just another piece of urban debris people's eyes skipped over. Cement trucks running late, one man muttered, checking his phone. He was older, with gray stubble and hands scarred from work that wasn't office-friendly. Doesn't matter, another replied, crouching near the drainage grate. We've got 40 minutes until the ceremony starts. Plenty of time to seal the chamber. Chamber. The word hung in the air like smoke. Ada watched as they pried open the grate with a crowbar, the metal screeching softly before giving way. The opening revealed darkness, a crawlspace beneath the cathedral's foundation that shouldn't have been accessible during a wedding. The third man, younger but with the same cold efficiency, opened one of the metal cases. Ada's angle wasn't perfect, but she could see bags inside. Heavy bags with industrial labels. And tubing. Lots of tubing. How much do we use? Gray Stubble asked. All of it. Chairman Jae-sung wants it airtight. No chances. Ada's pulse quickened. Chairman Jae-sung. She didn't know who that was, but the way they said his name, with respect and fear, told her he was someone powerful. Someone dangerous. The detonation will look like a gas line rupture. The younger one continued, threading tubes into the crawlspace. Floor collapses, groom falls through, cement seals behind him. Emergency crews will assume he was vaporized in the initial blast. No body, Gray Stubble said with satisfaction. No proof, the crouching man finished. Ada's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. They weren't just planning to kill someone. They were planning to bury someone. Alive. Beneath the very spot where he'd be standing. Saying his vows. Sealing a marriage that was supposed to bring peace. Her mind raced. The groom, whoever he was, would be at that altar in less than an hour. The floor would give way. He'd fall into the crawlspace. And before anyone could react, before anyone could pull him out, the cement would harden around him. Trapped. Suffocating. Screaming into stone that wouldn't answer. A cement mixer truck rumbled into the service area, backing up to the loading dock with practiced precision. Ada watched in horror as the men directed the flow of quick-dry concrete into the hidden chamber, filling it just enough to leave a pocket. A tomb-sized pocket, empty and waiting. 15 minutes to set the charges, one said, consulting his watch. Then we disappear before the guests arrive. They were laughing now, casual, comfortable, like this was just another job. Ada's entire body trembled. She could walk away, should walk away. This wasn't her world. These were dangerous men doing dangerous things for dangerous reasons. She was nobody, invisible, powerless. What could she possibly do? But the image wouldn't leave her mind. A man trapped in darkness, cement hardening, lungs screaming for air that would never come. Someone's son, maybe someone's father. A human being whose last moments would be pure terror. And no one would ever know. The world would think it was an accident, a tragedy, a gas explosion at a wedding. Clean, untraceable, perfect. Ada's hands clenched into fists. She'd lost everything. Her mother, her home, her dignity. The city had chewed her up and spat her out. She had nothing left to lose, except her humanity. She could choose to be invisible, or she could choose to be seen. Ada ran. Her bare feet slapped against pavement as she sprinted toward the cathedral's main entrance. Her lungs burning, her dress catching on her legs. She had to warn someone, had to make them listen, had to save a man she'd never met from a death he'd never see coming. Behind her, the men continued their work, unaware that their perfect plan had a witness. Ahead of her, the cathedral doors loomed like gates to another world. And inside, Cheol-min adjusted his tie one final time, completely unaware that his life now depended on whether anyone would listen to a homeless girl who smelled like the streets. Ada hit the front steps of the cathedral gasping for air, her words tumbling out in a desperate torrent before she even reached the guards. The altar. There's something under the altar. They're going to. Two security guards in crisp black suits turned toward her, their expressions shifting from bored professionalism to immediate disgust. One wrinkled his nose. The other's hand moved instinctively toward the radio clipped to his belt. Please, Ada panted, her chest heaving. You have to listen. There are men. They put cement under the floor. The groom is going to. Back up, the first guard said, holding up a hand like she was a stray dog. You can't be here. But someone's going to die. Ada's voice cracked with urgency. They're going to bury him. Under the church. There's a chamber filled with. Lady, I don't know what you're on, but you need to leave. Now. The second guard stepped forward, his face twisted with contempt. You smell like garbage. This is a private event. Move along before we call the police. I'm trying to help. Ada reached for the first guard's arm, desperation overriding every instinct to stay small and invisible. There's going to be an explosion. The floor is rigged. I saw them. He jerked away from her touch like she'd burned him. Don't touch me. Jesus, another crazy, the second guard muttered. They're like roaches in this neighborhood. I'm not crazy. Tears stung Ada's eyes. I saw them pour concrete into a space beneath the altar. They said no body, no proof. They're going to make it look like an accident, but it's murder. The first guard's expression hardened. You've got 10 seconds to disappear, or I'm having you arrested for trespassing and public disturbance. But, go. Ada stood frozen, her mind racing. How could she make them understand? How could she prove what she'd seen when she had nothing? No phone, no camera, no credibility. She was just a homeless girl with wild claims and wilder hair. The second guard moved toward her threateningly. I said move. Please. Ada whispered. One last desperate attempt. Just check. Just look under the altar before the ceremony starts. That's all I'm asking. Just look. His hand shot out and shoved her backward. Ada stumbled, her bare feet losing purchase on the smooth steps. She fell hard into the decorative flower beds lining the entrance, thorns scraping her arms, dirt grinding into her already filthy dress. Pain bloomed across her shoulder where she'd landed. Next time it's handcuffs, the guard spat. Through the towering cathedral doors, Ada heard it, the deep, resonant sound of the organ beginning to play, the opening notes of a processional. Beautiful, haunting, a countdown to death dressed in wedding music. The ceremony was starting. No, Ada breathed, scrambling to her feet, ignoring the blood trickling from her scraped elbow. No, no, no. The guards had already turned their backs, taking positions on either side of the entrance as the doors slowly swung closed. Through the narrowing gap, Ada caught a glimpse of the interior, rows of elegantly dressed guests rising to their feet, a long white aisle leading to an altar bathed in golden light, and a figure in a dark suit taking his position beside a woman in white. The groom. The doors shut with a heavy, final thunk. Ada stood there, chest heaving, mind spinning. If she failed, if she couldn't find a way inside, that man would stand on his own grave. The floor would collapse. Concrete would swallow him whole. And the world would never know it was murder. He would die screaming into darkness while his wedding guests screamed in horror above. And no one would ever find his body. Her hands trembled. Every rational thought told her to run, to save herself. These were powerful people doing powerful people things. She was nothing, nobody, a ghost the city had already forgotten. But she'd seen it. She knew. And if she walked away, if she chose her safety over his life, she'd be just as guilty as the men who'd poured that concrete. Ada wiped blood and tears from her face and started moving. She circled the cathedral's perimeter, her eyes scanning desperately for another way in. The main entrance was blocked. The guest entrance was surely guarded. But buildings like this always had service access, ways for cleaners and caterers and maintenance workers to move unseen through the spaces where important people gathered. Her fingers trailed along the ancient stone walls. There, a small side door, partially hidden behind overgrown hedges, marked with a faded sign, "Service personnel only." Ada's hand closed around the handle. Inside, the organ music swelled, beautiful and terrible. She had maybe 5 minutes, maybe less. Ada pulled the door open and slipped into the shadows. The side corridor was dim and narrow, lined with storage closets and forgotten hymnals. Ada's bare feet made almost no sound on the cold stone floor as she moved deeper into the cathedral's interior, following the swell of the organ like a compass pointing toward catastrophe. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Through the walls, she heard the priest's voice, deep, ceremonial, echoing through the sacred space with the gravity of tradition. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of two families, two futures, bound together in holy matrimony. Ada pressed forward, her breath coming in shallow gasps. A velvet curtain separated the service corridor from the main sanctuary. She approached it carefully, fingers trembling as she pulled back the heavy fabric just enough to see. Her breath caught. The cathedral was magnificent, soaring ceilings, stained glass casting jeweled light across marble floors, hundreds of elegantly dressed guests filling the pews like a congregation of wolves in silk and diamonds. At the center of it all, bathed in golden light from a chandelier overhead, stood the altar, and on it 2 figures. The groom was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark suit perfectly tailored. Even from this distance, Ada could see the tension in his posture, the way he held himself like a soldier expecting ambush. His face was handsome but guarded, eyes that had seen violence trying to focus on ceremony. Cheol-min, she thought, though she didn't know his name. That's the man they're going to bury. Beside him stood the bride, a woman in an intricate white gown that probably cost more than Ada had earned in her entire life. Her face was beautiful in the way porcelain dolls were beautiful. Perfect, cold, expressionless. She held a bouquet of white roses like a prop in a play she'd rehearsed but didn't believe in. Seo-yoon, Ada would later learn. The daughter of the man who'd ordered this execution. The priest continued, his voice rolling through the space like distant thunder. Marriage is a sacred bond, not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted. Ada's eyes dropped to the floor beneath the altar. It looked normal, solid, ancient marble that had supported centuries of prayers and promises. But she'd seen what lay beneath it, the hollow chamber, the quick-dry cement, the charges set to detonate. The priest raised his hands. If anyone present knows of any reason why this couple should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. The traditional pause, the moment that was always silent. Ada's legs moved before her mind gave permission. She burst through the curtain and ran. Her bare feet slapped against marble, each footfall echoing like a gunshot in the sudden, shocked silence. The organ music stuttered and died. Hundreds of faces turned as one. Surprise, confusion, disgust rippling through the assembly like a wave. "Stop her!" someone shouted. But Ada didn't stop. She ran straight down the aisle, her torn green dress streaming behind her, her matted hair wild around her face. She ran past rows of criminals in designer suits, past bodyguards reaching for weapons, past a world that had spent months telling her she was invisible. Cheolmin's head snapped toward the commotion, his eyes widening. Not in anger, but in absolute confusion as this barefoot girl in rags charged toward him like she was racing against death itself. Because she was. Seo-yoon turned too, but her expression was different. Not shock, not fear, anger, cold, focused anger that confirmed everything Ada had suspected. "Move!" Ada screamed, the word tearing from her throat. She didn't slow down, didn't explain. There was no time for explanation. Her hands grabbed fistfuls of Cheolmin's expensive lapels, the finest fabric she'd ever touched, and she yanked with every ounce of strength her malnourished body possessed. "Your floor is a grave," she cried, her voice cracking. "They sealed it shut." Cheolmin didn't understand. How could he? But something in her eyes, something in the raw terror and desperate conviction, made him stumble backward instead of resist. They fell together off the altar platform, Ada's momentum carrying them both toward the side aisle. Her shoulder hit marble. His body landed half on top of her, shielding her from the chaos erupting around them. Guards rushed forward, weapons drawn. Guests surged to their feet, shouting. The priest stood frozen, his ceremonial book hanging forgotten in his hands. And for one crystalline moment, time seemed to stop. Silence. Ada looked up at Cheolmin, their faces inches apart, and whispered through tears and desperation. 5 seconds. His eyes widened. Then the world ended. The explosion didn't sound like the movies. It sounded like the earth breaking open, like stones screaming, like God's own wrath tearing through the foundation of faith itself. The marble floor where Cheolmin had been standing, where he would have been standing if not for Ada's interference, folded inward like wet paper. Fire bloomed upward in a violent orange and black mushroom cloud. The shockwave blew outward, shattering stained glass into 1,000 deadly fragments of colored light. Screams replaced wedding music. And the altar, the place where vows should have been spoken, became a crater filled with flame and falling stone and the acrid smell of burning cement. The blast tore through the cathedral like the hand of an angry god. It didn't announce itself with a warning. There was no countdown, no moment to brace. 1 second the world was solid, stone and glass and the weight of centuries, and the next it was breaking. The marble floor where Cheolmin had stood buckled inward with a sound like bones snapping. Ancient stone that had supported prayers and processions for generations simply gave up, folding into itself as if the earth beneath had opened its mouth and decided to swallow the ceremony whole. Fire bloomed upward, violent, orange, hungry, erupting from the crawl space like pressurized hell. The explosion was different than anyone expected. Not the clean Hollywood fireball. This was industrial, chemical, the kind of blast that came from construction materials ignited by detonation charges. cement dust mixing with accelerant, creating a roiling black and orange cloud that punched through the altar like a fist through paper. The floor didn't just crack, collapsed. 6 feet of marble and foundation material disappeared into a widening crater, revealing the tomb beneath, the chamber those men had prepared with such careful efficiency. Quick-dry cement splattered upward in thick, gray chunks, still wet enough to splatter like obscene rain across the altar's remains. If Cheol-min had been standing there, if Ada had been 30 seconds later, he would have fallen into that space, and the cement would have sealed above him like a coffin lid made of stone. The shockwave hit next. It traveled outward in concentric circles of destruction, a wall of superheated air and debris that turned the sanctuary into a war zone. The stained glass windows, centuries-old masterpieces depicting saints and salvation, exploded outward in a shower of colored shrapnel. Ruby red and sapphire blue, emerald green and golden amber, all transformed into deadly confetti that rained down on screaming guests. The chandelier overhead swung violently, crystals shattering, chains groaning with metal fatigue. Wooden pews splintered, marble columns cracked. The very foundations of the building shuddered like a body in shock. Screams replaced the organ music. Not dignified gasps of surprise. Raw primal terror. The kind of screaming that came from people who'd lived violent lives suddenly understanding they weren't invincible. Guests stampeded toward the exits. Mobsters and politicians and criminal elite trampling over each other in silk suits and designer heels. All pretense of civilization abandoned in the face of mortality. Near the altar, Seo-yoon stumbled backward, her perfect composure finally cracking. A tongue of flame caught the edge of her veil, all that delicate lace and imported silk, and it went up like kindling. She shrieked, batting at her head, her carefully styled hair coming undone as she tore the burning fabric away. For the first time, she looked human. For the first time, she looked afraid. Cheol-min had moved on instinct the moment the floor gave way. His body had covered Ada's, shielding her from the blast with his broader frame. Debris rained down around them. Chunks of marble, splinters of wood, fragments of glass, and he felt each impact like accusations. This was meant for me. This should have been my grave. His ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out everything else. The world moved in slow motion. Smoke curling through shattered light, bodies running in panicked silhouette, fire consuming the place where he'd stood seconds ago. Dust settled like gray snow. The explosion's echo faded, replaced by groaning metal and crackling flames and the awful, wounded breathing of a building that had been violated. Silence pressed in around them, the shocked, terrible silence that comes after violence, when the brain is still catching up to what the body survived. Cheol-min lifted his head, coughing, blinking dust from his eyes. Ada lay beneath him, trembling, her face streaked with tears cutting clean lines through the grime on her cheeks. Her lips moved, whispering the same words over and over like a prayer or a curse. They sealed it shut. They sealed it shut. They sealed it shut. He looked up at the crater where the altar had been, at the exposed chamber beneath, a hollow space just large enough for a human body, its walls lined with fresh cement that glistened wetly in the firelight. A tomb. They'd built him a tomb beneath the place where he was supposed to pledge his life. Not beside his bride. Inside the church itself. The wedding was supposed to end a war. Instead, it had revealed one. A war where the enemy smiled and shook your hand and promised peace while pouring your grave beneath your feet. Cheol-min's hand found Ada's, gripping it tight. "You knew," he said, his voice hoarse with smoke and shock. "You knew." She nodded, unable to speak. Around them, the cathedral burned. The sacred space transformed into something else. A crime scene, a battlefield, a monument to betrayal. The church had become a tomb after all. Just not the one they'd planned. The smoke hadn't even begun to clear when the figure emerged. Chairman Jae-sung walked through the rubble like a man strolling through his own garden. Unhurried, unbothered, his expensive shoes crunching over shattered glass without breaking stride. His suit didn't have a speck of dust on it. His silver hair remained perfectly combed. Even his tie sat straight. He'd been standing too far from the blast to be affected. almost like he'd known exactly where to stand. Behind him came Seo-yoon, her burned veil discarded, her white dress smudged with ash but her spine straight. Her face no longer wore the mask of bridal serenity. What replaced it was colder, sharper, irritation, not grief for a husband who'd nearly died, not shock at the destruction, just the tight-lipped frustration of someone whose careful plans had been disrupted by an unforeseen variable. Cheol-min rose slowly, pulling Ada up with him, positioning himself between her and the approaching figures. His ears still rang from the blast, but his mind was clearing with the terrible precision of a man who'd survived by reading danger. "Not an accident," he said, his voice cutting through the groaning of damaged stone. Jae-sung's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "No, not an accident." Around them, the remaining guests had fled or taken cover. The few who remained were Jae-sung's people. Hard-eyed men in suits who'd appeared from the shadows like smoke had birthed them. They formed a loose perimeter, hands hovering near concealed weapons. "You tried to kill me," Cheol-min continued, his tone flat, stating fact, not asking questions. "At my own wedding. Kill you?" Jae-sung tilted his head as if considering the semantics. "No, Cheol-min. We tried to erase you. There's a difference." Seo-yoon crossed her arms, her bouquet long forgotten. "You were supposed to make this easy. Stand where you were told. Say your vows. Fall through the floor like a good groom." The casual cruelty in her voice, the way she discussed his planned death like it was a minor inconvenience, sent ice down Cheol-min's spine. "The marriage," he said slowly, pieces clicking into place. "It was never about peace." "Of course not." Jae-sung's expression held the patient condescension of a teacher explaining basic math to a slow student. "Peace is profitable, yes, but monopoly is more profitable. Your syndicate controls the southern ports. My family controls the north. Together, we'd be unstoppable. So you proposed a merger, and you were inconvenient." Jae-sung spread his hands as if the logic was self-evident. "A marriage binds families, but a widowed daughter? She inherits everything. Your territory, your men, your operations, all absorbed into our family holdings without the complication of your leadership." Ada's voice cut through, small but steady. "They were going to bury you." Both men turned to look at her, this homeless girl still trembling from adrenaline and terror. "Alive," she continued, her words gaining strength. "I watched them pour cement into a chamber under the altar. They said no body, no proof. The explosion was supposed to make the floor collapse. You'd fall through, and the cement would seal shut before anyone could pull you out." She met Jae-sung's eyes with something that looked like defiance mixed with disbelief. "The world would think the blast vaporized you, but you'd be there, trapped, screaming into stone, suffocating in the dark while your wedding guests mourned above you." Silence. Jae-sung studied Ada like she was an insect that had wandered into his sightline, mildly interesting, mostly irrelevant. "Clever girl," he said softly. "Unfortunately, clever doesn't change your position." He raised one hand, a casual gesture, barely more than a finger lift. Around the perimeter, his men reached inside their jackets. The sound of safeties clicking off echoed through the damaged cathedral like a second, smaller countdown. Cheol-min's body tensed. He'd survived an explosion meant to bury him alive. He'd be damned if he'd die now, executed in the rubble of his own wedding. Ada pressed closer to his back, and he felt her shaking. This girl who'd run toward danger to save a stranger, now trapped in the consequence of her own courage. Jae-sung's smile widened. "Nothing personal, you understand. Just business." The guns rose. Then the world filled with the roar of engines. Not one, not two, a fleet of them. Black SUVs skidded into the cathedral courtyard, tires screaming against cobblestone. Doors flew open before the vehicles even stopped moving, and men poured out. Cheol-min's men, his syndicate, his people who'd been waiting blocks away as insurance against exactly this kind of treachery. They came armed, they came ready, and they surrounded Jae-sung's forces in a tightening circle of steel and loyalty. The chairman's men froze, suddenly outnumbered 3-1. Jae-sung's expression finally cracked. Just a flicker, but enough to show the calculation happening behind his eyes. The cost-benefit analysis of continuing this fight. For the first time since the explosion, Seo-yoon looked genuinely afraid. Cheol-min stepped forward, glass crunching beneath his feet, and smiled without warmth. "You wanted to erase me," he said quietly. "But I'm still here." The tables had turned, and everyone in that ruined cathedral knew it. Jae-sung's knees hit the rubble. It wasn't a choice. Two of Cheol-min's men, large, efficient, and utterly unmoved by the chairman's status, forced him down with hands on his shoulders. The man who'd smiled while plotting murder now knelt in the ashes of his own scheme, his expensive suit collecting dust from broken stone. Beside him, Seo-yoon stood frozen, her eyes darting between the guns surrounding them and the exit she'd never reach. Her hands, which had held a bridal bouquet minutes ago, now trembled at her sides. "You're making a mistake," Jae-sung said, his voice still attempting authority despite his position. "This is between families. You can't." "Can't what?" Cheol-min's voice was quiet, which somehow made it more dangerous. "Can't hold you accountable for attempted murder? For building a tomb beneath a church? For planning to bury me alive while shaking my hand?" The sound of sirens cut through the air, distant at first, then growing louder. Multiple vehicles approaching fast. Jae-sung's face went pale. "You called the police?" Seo-yoon's voice cracked with disbelief. "You don't call the police. That's not how this works." "It is now," Cheol-min said. The first police cruiser arrived, followed by others. But more importantly, behind them came the news vans, 3, then 4, satellite dishes rising like metal flowers, cameras already rolling as reporters scrambled out, drawn by scanner chatter about an explosion at a high-profile wedding. This wasn't going to be handled quietly in back rooms and dark alleys. This was going public. A young officer approached, hand on his weapon, eyes wide as he took in the scene. The destroyed cathedral, the crater where the altar had been, the armed standoff, the kneeling chairman of one of the city's most powerful families. "What happened here?" he demanded. Cheol-min gestured to the exposed chamber beneath the ruined floor. "There's a tomb under the altar. They built it to bury me during my own wedding ceremony. You'll find quick-dry cement, detonation charges, and enough evidence to prove this wasn't a gas leak." The officer's radio crackled with urgent voices. More police arrived, then fire trucks, then investigators who would spend the next week documenting every horrifying detail. A reporter managed to get close enough to shout, "Chairman Jae-sung, is it true you attempted to assassinate your daughter's groom during the ceremony?" Cameras swiveled toward him, microphones thrust forward like weapons. Jae-sung's carefully constructed reputation, built over decades of strategic violence and political maneuvering, began to crumble in real time. His face appeared on screens across the city within minutes. On his knees, surrounded by police, at the scene of a failed assassination plot inside a cathedral. The story was too big to bury, too public to spin, too damning to survive. Seo-yoon tried to speak, to defend, to explain, but the cameras caught every word. Her cold admission that Cheol-min was supposed to fall through the floor. Her irritation rather than horror at the explosion. Her complete lack of grief for the husband she'd planned to widow before the ink dried on the marriage license. The alliance that was supposed to end a turf war instead exposed it. The merger that would have created an unstoppable criminal empire collapsed before it could begin. And the families, both of them, would spend years untangling themselves from the legal and political fallout of what the media was already calling the wedding tomb assassination. But Cheol-min wasn't watching. He'd turned away from the chaos, from the cameras, from the spectacle of his enemy's downfall. His eyes searched the rubble until he found her. Ada, standing apart from everything, looking small and lost and utterly overwhelmed. He walked to her, knelt beside her, brought himself down to her level even though he was the one everyone wanted to photograph, to interview, to crown as the survivor of an impossible assassination attempt. Ada's face was streaked with tears cutting through ash and grime. "I thought no one would listen," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the chaos. I tried to warn the guards, but they pushed me away, called me crazy. I thought no one would believe me. Cheol-min reached out slowly, giving her time to pull back, and when she didn't, he gently took her hand. You were right, he said quietly. No one believed you. Her face crumpled. But you acted anyway. The words settled between them, simple, profound, true. She'd had every reason to walk away, to save herself, to let the invisible remain invisible and the powerful destroy each other without her interference. But she'd run toward danger instead of away from it. She'd risked everything. Her safety, her life, her fragile grip on survival. For a man she didn't know, would never be thanked for saving, could easily have ignored. She'd chosen to be seen when the world had spent months teaching her to disappear. You saved my life, Cheol-min continued, his grip on her hand steady and warm. Not because I could repay you, not because it would benefit you. You saved me because it was right. Around them, the machinery of justice ground into motion. Police took statements. Investigators photographed evidence. Reporters crafted headlines. But in that moment, kneeling in rubble beside a homeless girl who'd become the most important person in the room, Cheol-min understood something he'd forgotten during years of violence and strategy. True power wasn't wealth or weapons or the fear you could inspire. True power was having nothing and choosing to give it anyway. It was moral courage in the face of a world that rewarded cowardice. It was Ada, in her torn green dress, running toward fire to save a stranger. 3 days later, sunlight filled a hospital room on the 7th floor. It was the kind of gentle, filtered light that only comes through clean windows in quiet places. A light Ada hadn't seen in months. The bed beneath her was soft. The sheets were white and crisp and smelled like detergent instead of streets. A small vase of flowers sat on the nightstand, placed there by a nurse who'd smiled at her like she was human. Ada sat propped against pillows, her arm bandaged where thorns and debris had cut her. Her body finally fed and rested enough to stop trembling. She wore a hospital gown that was too big, but it was clean, and that was a luxury she'd almost forgotten existed. The door opened without knocking. Cheol-min entered alone. No bodyguards flanking him, no security detail checking the corners. Just a man in a simple black shirt and jeans, carrying a folder and wearing an expression Ada couldn't quite read. He'd survived the explosion with minor cuts and a bruised shoulder. The news had spent the last 72 hours calling him everything from Seoul's luckiest groom to the man who escaped his own grave. But looking at him now, Ada saw only someone tired and changed. How are you feeling? He asked, pulling a chair close to her bed. Like I'm dreaming, Ada admitted. Her voice was still hoarse from screaming and smoke. The nurses keep bringing me food. Real food. I keep waiting to wake up in an alley. Cheol-min's expression softened. You're not dreaming. He placed the folder on her lap. Ada stared at it like it might bite her. What is this? Open it. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the cover. The first document was a lease agreement. An apartment, a real apartment with an address in a decent neighborhood. 1 bedroom, furnished, utilities included. Her name was already typed in the tenant line. I don't understand, she whispered. Keep going. Beneath the lease was a scholarship letter. A full ride to a community college with programs in social work, nursing, business administration, whatever she wanted to study. The acceptance was unconditional. The funding was guaranteed for 4 years. Ada's hands shook harder. The final document was a bank statement. An account opened in her name. The balance made her vision blur. Enough to rebuild. Enough to breathe. Enough to stop running for the first time since her mother died. Why? The word came out broken. I can't, why would you? Cheol-min leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that was gentle despite its weight. I spent years trying to buy loyalty with money, he said quietly, trying to purchase silence, to command respect through fear and wealth. It never worked. Not really. People stayed because they were paid to stay. They obeyed because the alternative was worse. He gestured to the folder in her lap. You saved my life without asking for anything. You ran toward danger when everyone else ran from you. You chose to act when you had every reason to stay invisible and safe. Ada's eyes filled with tears. You didn't know me, Cheol-min continued. Didn't know if I was worth saving. For all you knew, I was just another criminal in an expensive suit. But you saw a human being about to die, and you moved. A sob escaped her throat. That's worth more than anything I could ever pay you. But I'm trying anyway, because you deserve a life, Ada. A real life. Not survival. Not scraps. A life. The tears came fully now, streaming down her face in hot tracks. She clutched the folder to her chest like it might disappear if she let go. The city ignored you, Cheol-min said softly. Now it owes you, and I'm making sure it pays that debt. Ada cried quietly, her shoulders shaking with the weight of months, years, of being invisible, of being nothing, finally lifting. The world that had stepped over her was now reaching back. It wouldn't erase what she'd lost, wouldn't bring her mother back or undo the hunger and fear and nights spent wondering if she'd survive to see morning. But it was a beginning, a second chance wrapped in paperwork and genuine kindness. Cheol-min stood, giving her space to process, to feel, to break down in the safety of a clean room with soft light. I'll leave you to rest, he said. But if you need anything, anything at all, you call me. He placed a card on the nightstand, his personal number. As he reached the door, Ada's voice stopped him. What about you? She asked through tears. What happens to you now? Cheol-min paused, his hand on the doorframe, and looked back. I figure out what kind of man I want to be, he said simply. The kind who builds tombs beneath altars? Or the kind who listens to barefoot girls in torn dresses? He smiled small but real. You changed my fate, Ada. Now I get to choose what to do with it. A poor girl dragged a mafia boss away from his wedding altar. Seconds later, the truth exploded. Fire and concrete and carefully laid plans erupted into public scandal. A merger became a murder plot. A bride became a conspirator. And a cathedral became the grave that never was. The powerful knelt in rubble. The alliance shattered. And the only honest person in the room, the one no one had wanted to see, the one they'd pushed into flower beds and called crazy, became the reason a man survived to tell the story. Sometimes salvation doesn't arrive in limousines or designer suits. Sometimes it runs barefoot down a marble aisle, smelling like alleys and desperation, carrying nothing but the truth and the courage to speak it. And sometimes the invisible become the only ones who matter. If you enjoyed the story this far, don't let it end here. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next chapter and enjoy more story from us. And if this story gave you chills, drop a like and share it with someone who loves powerful romance with a dangerous edge. Your support keeps these stories coming. Thank you.